Hi there, this is Matt at State of Flux here with a review for Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. That's right, after the failed attempt at making an anthology series with Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, a film which was, at the time, regarded as a very negative installment, has gained a lot of traction and popularity. They decided to do a return to form for the 10-year anniversary of Halloween in the fourth movie by having Michael Myers return once more. And it works to an extent. It never really feels like the first two installments, but it's kind of a weird movie in that it's also not really that bad of a movie. It just kind of hits the exact same beats of the first movie while sprinkling in a motivation for Michael Myers established in the second film. This time Laurie Strode is absent, having been killed off-screen, and this time following her daughter, Jamie Lloyd. Jamie Lloyd, played by Danielle Harris, who is serviceable for this movie, but would grow to be a pretty strong actress in her own right in many movies after this, including various Halloween films hereafter. The problem with this film stems from a couple of different things. There is absolutely no tension in this film. I don't care about who lives or dies. Michael Myers flits in between this sort of... Michael Myers just feels off, let's put it this way. The appeal to the first movie for me was that he was a stalker. You didn't know when he was going to spring. The brilliance of that opening scene in the first movie, where he slaughtered his sister, tells you that the coil can spring at any time, yet it just keeps tightening, and as he stalks Laurie and the babysitters throughout the first about 50 minutes of that first movie, before he starts to pick them off in the final 20 minutes. And it's brilliant tension. The second one, what didn't work for me is, outside of the first 20 minutes where he is sort of just stalking his prey, he's just a mindless killer. This movie has it play both ways, where early on he kills everybody in the caravan that is taking him. He appears to be in some kind of hospice state. As they're taking him on the night before Halloween, he breaks loose once more, a la Halloween, the first film, killing everybody in the vehicle. Then he kills somebody to get the overalls, just like he did in the first movie, and then he acquires the mask. At that point, he's sort of just stalking Jamie and her adoptive sister through a decent chunk of the film. Here and there you get a random murder. And that's where it's weird, because established in the first two films is he's mindless. He is that of a child in this man's body, but still, able to drive. This film he doesn't. He walks everywhere. But he is very calculating in this film. He goes to lengths to take away any form of safety environment for Jamie by first killing the phone system, killing the electric system of the entire Haddonfield town, and then picking off all of the police officers that are on duty at the station. That's when he goes to make his move on Jamie, with only her sister and adoptive sister and Dr. Sam Loomis to stand in the way. Sam Loomis and Michael Myers' recovery from the previous installment with which they were in at Halloween 2 is never really fully explained. They just have you kind of go with it. And they do some burn makeup on both Michael, where you see skin, his wrists and stuff like that. His face is covered, Dark Man style in the beginning. You see burn scarring and stuff like that. And they do the same for Sam Loomis. He has a lot of burn scarring on his cheek, a little bit on his forehead and hands and stuff like that, which was a nice touch. However, it's very hard to believe that either of those men would have survived that explosion and the burning face of that Michael Myers mask at the end of the second movie. But they ask you to go with it, and I must, so I did. That said, Sam Loomis is still trying to put a desperate stop to any kind of rehabilitation for Michael, and saying we must kill this boy, who's now a 35-year-old man. Whatever, it goes by the same beats. There's no tension, the kills aren't particularly interesting. I was impressed with how reserved the kills were. They are largely done either off-screen or they aren't too terribly gruesome. Occasionally you'll get one that's super gruesome, which from my understanding was reshoots so that the film could compete with the Friday the 13th franchise and Nightmare on Elm Street franchises respectively, which had gained in popularity, and this is the first installment of a Halloween movie to come out in the same subsequent year as a Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. And compared to Nightmare 4 and Friday the 13th 7, this movie is weak sauce with its kills, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that the appeal of that first Halloween is the tension that you get in the horror rather than the gruesome kills. You go to Friday the 13th for gruesome kills, or you go to Nightmare on Elm Street for spectacular fantasy kills. Halloween is just much more mundane. You can do a lot more with implied violence than you can with actual on-screen violence. That said, because they show a couple scenes of it, the rest of the film feels kind of neutered. It's a weird paradox that this film just kind of settles itself into. The whole film feels like a paradox, because at the end of the day, it's not a bad movie. It's also just not very good. It covers virtually no new ground. The one element that I like in this film that is going to be touched on later in the David Gordon Green movies is the townsfolk of Haddonfield deciding to fight back and sort of like weaponize themselves against Michael and hunt that man down. That aspect is kind of cool, and how they accidentally kill one of their own in doing so. Again, done in the David Gordon Green timeline, proving that that franchise, those three movies, had no original thoughts. But I digress. The conclusion of this movie is kind of great, but out of nowhere. They do nothing to set up that the fragile mind of this child is fracturing to the point where she could eventually commit to murder herself. And had they laid the groundwork for this conclusion, I think this movie would have landed much better. They do the groundwork with Sam Loomis's character, where he talks to that reverend guy that's a little kooky, who tells him that evil never really goes away, and kind of issues a warning that the evil may come back in a new way. And so at the end of the movie, when it does, and Sam's screaming and stuff like that, it really, that part plays well. They just didn't do enough with the Jamie Lloyd character to make that land. However, I like the idea of following that story trajectory. Had we gotten a fifth movie that explored Jamie Lloyd in the same way that Michael Myers had been, it would have been worth something. As is, you're sending this kind of weird message that if you are a person who watches extreme violence, which you've just had an audience do for at least 90 minutes, if not 4 collective hours, if you're incorporating the other 2 feature films, then you're kind of telling the audience that they themselves could have this murderous rampage rise up in them and maybe excuse the violence, not excuse the violence, but say that the cycle of violence that they've seen is inspiring them to commit violence themselves. That's a weird message to send at the end of the movie when not explored further beyond this one. So I'm just going to let that sit there. It's kind of weird. And if you're not going to explore it later, character-wise, I don't like the idea that all of this stuff stems from, like, because your family lineage connects you to somebody who is bad does not make you a bad person or inevitably succumb to these dark tendencies, these dark notions. And that's something that kind of just in general bugs me. Had this been explored better, had this been written a little stronger, I think you could have made this work and land in ways that are not offensive, that are really interesting and paving new ground, and can create parallels with the family, but as is just kind of doesn't work. And a lot of that has to do with a writer's strike, which we just went through this year. This was written at a time where there was an impending writer's strike, and in fact the script had to be completed within 11 days in order to not fall under strike regulations and stop production. The script was completed in those 11 days within 2 hours of the strike being called. So it was down to the bottom line, and then once they had what they had to lock it in. They couldn't switch it up. My feeling is that it was probably an idea that was designed to be explored more in subsequent drafts, which they just never got a chance to do. This was a one draft and done kind of screenplay, and this kind of really shows that screenplays require multiple drafts to really refine and develop character. As is, most of these characters feel kind of wooden, even by Halloween franchise standards. I challenge you to remember most of their names. I remember Jamie Lloyd because she appears in sequels, and I remember Brady because that dude had an interesting name. But other than that, I don't even remember the name of the new sheriff. I don't even remember the name of the adoptive sister, and she shows up in a sequel. But I digress. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers gets 2.5 out of 4 stars. It's okay. It's fine. It's better than the second movie. Not as scary, but better than that one. But it's not as good, anywhere near as good as the first one. It's just kind of okay. One last comment that I'll make is, I kind of like the look of this film. It is a touch overlit, but I like how it's lit. It's a pretty solid looking film. Now, going along with that, as much as I like the look of the film, I hate the look of the Michael Myers mask. That's something that most people comment on. They changed it up, they made it whiter, they made it originally with blonde hair, and then they went and did reshoots with brown hair, which was probably the right idea. There's still a shot with blonde-haired Michael Myers in the school at the end of the movie, but I really, really hate this mask. So they switch up the mask for the 5th one, which will be a tease, I guess, that I'll leave you off with. You'll hear my thoughts on the 5th movie and the 5th mask in 6 months' time at Halloween at the end of April. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe. Let me know what you think of this film in the comments down below. Peace. Oh, and happy Halloween, everybody.